Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today we're looking at my top 12 wide receivers heading into the 2023 fantasy season. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel as well. If you enjoyed, we've got videos dropping Sunday, Monday, and Wednesdays on the channel for fantasy football. As well, if you're looking for any other fantasy advice, we have all of it here on the channel. Today we'll be, again, covering my top 12, some of my reasons I like these guys. We'll try to be quick to get through the top 12 for you. I'm sure you've seen a lot of these players before in any other fantasy channels you're watching, but just a little bit of detail on why I like these guys, where they're at. But as well, if you guys haven't checked out Peace Collective, it is one of the best places to go to if you're looking to get some of your favorite teams' gear and vintage apparel. I'm always looking to find, throwback apparel for some of my favorite teams, the Chargers in the NFL, the Blue Jays in Major League Baseball. But if you guys want to find it, it's there. It's at Peace Collective. They got tons of different stuff you can find on your favorite teams. I'm usually going to, I guess not a lot of people are in Canada would know what I'm talking about, but a lot of different stores and places to try to find vintage stuff all in one place. If you use promo code OwnersBox10, 10% off. I'll include the link to their site in the description as well as in the pinned comments. So let's get to the top 12. At 12, Jaylen Waddle. He finished as the wide receiver 7 in half PPR formats. We'll look at half PPR for all these players. We're looking at their performance from last season. His 78 receptions did rank 22nd at the position. So that was the one place that he wasn't at that truly elite level. His 8 touchdowns were 9th, so good production there from that standpoint. Yards after the catch. This guy was a monster after the catch. 6.7 yards after the catch per reception, which was 3rd at the position. His 17.9 yards per reception was 1st. This is the one thing that he's done incredibly well. His ADOT isn't crazy high. He has that ability to create yards after the catch, like I mentioned, but this number is one that can be unsustainable, and why I have him a little bit farther back compared to his finish last year. Some of the guys that led in this category the last 3 seasons before last year were Deebo Samuel, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and Mike Williams. Those are guys that could be a little bit more inconsistent. We obviously saw that with Deebo last season. So someone that is going to be able to give you that consistent production, and for me to be able to give him the outlook of being higher on my list, he needs to give me more consistency from that receptions department, which I don't think we will see. There's obviously that competition between him and Tyreek Hill, but regardless, he's a tremendous player in creating value after the catch. And then as well, with this offense, the Dolphins are probably the most explosive offense in the league. Tua averaged 8.9 yards per attempt last season. Playing with Tyreek Hill is going to open up those yards after the catch opportunities. Love Jaylen Waddle. Still see him as wide receiver 1 this season, but just more on that fringe. My wide receiver 11, someone I'm definitely higher on than consensus, is Amari Cooper. Cooper finishes the wide receiver 10 in 2022, so was a wide receiver 1 on the season. With Jacoby Brissett, he was really good, actually. He's actually the wide receiver 7 in fantasy points per game. He had 16 fantasy points per game with Jacoby Brissett at QB. And then once Deshaun Watson stepped in, he was actually the wide receiver 19 in fantasy points per game in those final 6 games. So there was actually a drop-off with Watson stepping in, but I think now we get the benefit of the full season to build up in terms of being able to work together in preparations for the start of the year. Watson, because of how long his absence was going to be in his suspension, they didn't have that ability to do so because they had 12 games they had to play without Watson. Can we all agree that Watson is a better quarterback than Jacoby Brissett? I think so. I mean, you look at those 2020 stats, we've talked about them in previous videos, had an over 70% completion percentage, led the NFL in yards, passing yards, had a low turnover-worthy play rate, could still hit explosive plays, which I think is really important as well with Cooper, who's a very good guy when it comes to air yards. He was 5th in air yards last season and 3rd in unrealized air yards. So there was some opportunities and some big plays that he just didn't hit on that he could hit on this season as well. He had a dominant target share, 26.1%, which was top 16 at the position, and he had plenty of end zone work. Elijah Moore comes in. I still see this production staying the same for Cooper in terms of his share in the offense, but I also see this offense being better this season, so I do think he can replicate his finish from last year. So I like him as a wide receiver 11. At 10 is Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. He was the wide receiver 8 in 2022, 106 receptions last year, which was 5th at the position. Did miss a couple games as well, despite the big number above 100 receptions on the year. I think he's a guy that can challenge for the league lead in receptions. He can keep up with guys like like Justin Jefferson, like Cooper Kupp, and be that high level receiver. His ADOT's really low. Like, they're getting him the ball, looking for him to make plays after the catch. His ADOT was just 6.7 yards, which was 96th amongst wide receivers. And there's also the departure of Jamal Williams. 17 touchdowns leave this offense. Where are those going to go to? I think he's a likely opportunity, or the likely guy to get that opportunity, it's probably going to go to more of the running back position, but there could be a few that come his way. Jameson Williams is going to miss the first 6 games of the season. 33-year-old Marvin Jones steps in. There's not a lot of competition in this offense, especially with the departure of TJ Hawkinson. So if Amon-Ra St. Brown plays a full year, those reception numbers are going to give him an incredibly high floor. And this offense played at a really high level last year, scored a ton. And with Brown, I think he can be the beneficiary with Jamal Williams' exit too. My wide receiver 9, A.J. Brown. He finished as the wide receiver 5 in 2022, 1,496 receiving yards, which was 4th amongst wide receivers. He scored 11 touchdowns, which was 2nd amongst wide receivers. My one problem, this guy is honestly in an offense that scores at a really high level, one of my favorite offenses on the season, which will be coming. Top 10 offenses are coming on Wednesday. Love this offense. Very efficient, very productive, looking for a lot of deep balls as well. He was 6th in deep targets with 29. He was 17th in end zone targets, so still a decent amount of volume of scoring around there. My big problem is, and one that I don't think is something you can consistently see year after year from somebody, he had turned 24% of his deep targets into touchdowns, which was 7 total touchdowns came on targets of 20-plus yards. Just to give you a comparison, he had that rate was at 7% in 2021 compared to 24% last year. Then you have Tyreek Hill, who led the league in deep targets. His touchdown rate on his deep targets was 13%. So I would expect that to definitely drop below 20% this season. You just can't convert your deep targets into that many touchdowns year after year. We saw it from him just last year. So I love Brown. This offense is going to score a lot of touchdowns. He's still going to score touchdowns. He's still going to see highly valuable targets and deep targets. I just don't know how often he'll turn those into scores. So 11 touchdowns on the year might not be replicable for him. My wide receiver 8 on the season is CeeDee Lamb. He finished last year as the wide receiver 6. His 107 receptions were 4th at the position, so he was great there. Good volume. And now, looking at his past season and then the 2 years prior in his rookie year and sophomore year, we got some really good points here to be able to expect him to continue to improve and continue to be an elite wide receiver in this league from that fantasy perspective. He added 32 receptions compared to 2021, and he had less drops, which is great. And his catch rate improved drastically. He had a career best 72.3% catch rate. So those drops have fallen off, which was a problem in his first 2 years. Was not a problem for him last year. And then as well, I guess I don't have him higher than what his ranking was from last year, as now my wide receiver 8. McCarthy stepping in and calling offensive plays is going to be really interesting for this team, because if you look at his previous 2 years, which was 2017 and 2018, when he was calling plays in Green Bay, their pass rate was high, 65% pass rate, compared to what the Cowboys were last year with a 54.7% pass rate. So we have a more than 10% increase in passing volume potentially coming for this team, and those are going to increase on those 107 receptions he had last year. Now, the reason I don't have him elevated into, my top 5 would be we bring in Brandon Cooks to be that more consistent option on the outside. Can Michael Gallup stay healthy? If these guys do, that could have an impact on him far exceeding those reception numbers from last year, with this offense potentially throwing the ball more, is a little bit better target competition. We lose Dalton Schultz, of course, but these are 2 guys that can give him target competition. So I still love CeeDee Lamb. Those numbers when it comes to McCarthy stepping in are really, really interesting for you from a fantasy perspective. At the 7th spot, Devante Adams of the Las Vegas Raiders. He was the wide receiver 3 in 2022, 168 targets. 2nd at the position, just 8 less than Justin Jefferson during the regular season. His 32.6% target share was 1st in the NFL. Now we see Darren Waller depart. That can bring up some opportunity for him and somehow increase on these targets. My concern would be, of course, we have Jimmy Garoppolo stepping in. He's capable of supporting a wide receiver 1. Deebo Samuel finishes the wide receiver 2 overall in 2021. My question is the deep target volume. We know Derek Carr is a guy that loves to push the ball downfield. I thought that might decrease with Josh McDaniels coming in. It didn't. He led the league in deep targets. He had 38 deep targets, and he turned 15 of those deep targets that he caught into 9 touchdowns. So Jimmy Garoppolo comes in, definitely not one that pushes the ball down the field as much as Carr does. And when you look at this Raiders team from that rushing volume perspective, it could increase even further. It was really good last year. It could increase even further with installing Garoppolo in at quarterback. But I mean, even when we saw the quarterback change last year to Stidham, Adams was still very good. So I still really like him. My question is, again, the deep targets, can that be replicated again? I'm a little bit hard-pressed to see that. So I still see him as a great option, but not in my top 3. Moving forward to the wide receiver 6, I have Garrett Wilson. Man, every time I look at his numbers and look at his play from last season, I just want to move him up and up and up. I was making little adjustments. I set my top 12, and then I'm going through all my research to kind of further fortify this top 12, and I made some changes, and Wilson was a guy I kept moving up. He was the wide receiver 19 in 2022, so a very good rookie season for him. He was 14th in receiving yards with over 1,100 on the year, 7th in targets, 139. Okay, he had 139 targets, 7th at the position, and his catch rate was not good, below 60%, 59.7%, which was 80th, right around the similar level to Devante Adams, but he was missing the deep targets and missing that deep target volume. But he also was very good in the end zone, and that end zone guy that the team would look to. He was 9th in end zone targets. He turned those 11 end zone targets into just 2 touchdowns. So opportunity to be more productive in the red zone, for sure. And with a better quarterback and it not being Zach Wilson, definitely more, you expect to see those 139 targets be much more valuable than that 59.7% catch rate. So I would expect that to get at least into the mid-60s for him, potentially closer to the 70s. This guy is a tremendous talent, has a great catch radius, very soft hands, obviously a guy they relied on in the red zone like I mentioned. And then the what's the word I'm looking for in this? The target competition. I don't think it's that great either. Like Mecole Hardman, has never proven to be a guy, one, lately to stay on the field, and two, demand volume. He's a guy we always talked about with Patrick Mahomes. People wanted to look at him in the preseason as, hey, he could break out. It never happened. Allen Lazard, definitely not someone I'm worried about from a target competition perspective. Tyler Conklin had a good year last year. Be interesting to see what he does at the tight end position. But Wilson is the fortified wide receiver 1, and we've seen what the number 1 pass catching option for Aaron Rodgers can do in fantasy football when it comes to Devante Adams, when it comes to Christian Watson's finish at the end of the year. I mean, we put a little bit too much of Christian Watson's potential into this year off the backs of what Aaron Rodgers does as a quarterback. And I think Garrett Wilson has the upside to be potentially, I think, a top 3 receiver for this season, but he's my wide receiver 6 in my rankings right now. My wide receiver 5, Stefon Diggs. He finished as the wide receiver 4 in 2022, 119 receptions, 4th at the position, 18 end zone targets. That was great for him. It has been for the last few years, which is really, really good when you're looking at fantasy assets. The 18 end zone targets were 2nd overall. My question is, when it comes to a little bit behind what his ranking was last year, or what his finish was last year, is will the addition of Dalton Kincaid and then potentially a healthy Dawson Knox have an impact on that end zone volume and that touchdown volume he gets inside the 20? And then as well, I mean, there's got to be some sort of adjustment from this team when it comes to Josh Allen's propensity to turn the ball over in the red zone. He had 5 red zone turnovers last season. Could they provide more rushing volume? Could they look to run the ball in a more traditional way with their running backs in the red zone, inside the 10, inside the 5, and not be a team that's too high of a volume throwing the football in those areas of the field? I mean, they added Damian Harris, who's a poster child guy for, hey, we want to improve our efficiency in the red zone. We want to start scoring more touchdowns on the ground there. He did it in New England. He could certainly do it here for Buffalo too. So that is a bit of concern. But I mean, the lack of target competition is definitely still there for Diggs when you look at those receptions I talked about from last season, 119 of them. Definitely see that being sustainable. I mean, Gabe Davis is a very inconsistent downfield threat for this team that doesn't really have any impediment on Diggs' share of this target volume of the targets from this offense. And then we have the sophomore Khalil Shakir coming into that slot role for this team. Definitely a lot of question marks. A guy I'm very interested in and probably want to take in the end of my drafts, but Diggs still cemented in his role here, despite those training camp issues when it comes to his role. I guess his role in the offense, or his say in the offense. Should be interesting how his season develops, but still love him. At 4, I have Tyreek Hill. He was the wide receiver 2 in 2022. Some of these numbers are crazy year he had, honestly. Incredible to leave Kansas City and then probably put together his best season of his career. His 3.2 yards per route run, 1st at the position, and it was by a significant margin. Justin Jefferson's yards per route run was 2nd best at 2.62, like a massive separation. So he really demanded targets, demanded volume, and he basically gave you everything you're looking for, less the red zone numbers. We know that he's not a big-time red zone threat. I don't think that's going to change. I don't think it's ever really going to be elite. But when you blend really high target volume into a guy that also has the capability of hitting a ton of big plays. He was first in deep targets. He was tied with Adams with 38. And then he also managed to have a 71.3% catch rate. So this is a guy that you can use at all levels of the field, as a guy in those end around plays, as a guy for a deep ball, as a guy you're asking to create yards after the catch. And on those deep targets, he didn't do what Devante Adams did. He had 5 touchdowns on his 38 deep targets. Meanwhile, Adams had 9. So there's potentially room to grow to turn more of his deep targets into touchdowns. So he could certainly sustain that level of play from last season. But what I don't want to do is put a guy in my top 3 that I'm worried about getting into. Like, double-digit touchdowns is really how you finish as a top 3 player at the position. Hill did it while being right on that cusp. And there's a potential that he could still do it again this year, but a little bit less predictable for me when it comes to my rankings. The number 3 spot goes to JaMarr Chase. He finished as the wide receiver 12 on the season, but he was the wide receiver 5 in points per game. Obviously missed 5 games. Yeah, I think he played 12 games last year, missed 5. He was on pace for 179 targets. It's always good to look at pace. I mean, this is a massive sample size. This isn't just 4 games. He played like 12 games last year. Would have led the league. Justin Jefferson had 176. Again, I'm looking at some of the stats I'm talking about are ones from PFF. There are a couple sites that have different numbers on targets, which is weird because I think throwaways and whatnot, some of them can be hard to define. But then you look at his receptions. He was on pace for 123, which would have been second at the position. So volume is really, really good. Awesome. And he had 14 end zone targets. That was 5th at the position, despite, like I said, missing 5 games. So he's got great volume and he's got great opportunity when it comes to scoring touchdowns. The one thing that's missing, and the thing I think he potentially adds this year, and why I love him as a top 3 wide receiver, is the potential of some more deep targets and volume downfield. Burrow was 16th at the quarterback position in deep targets, which again are passes of 20+ air yards. Could a healthy offensive line, the addition of Orlando Brown Jr., help that improve that number? This is the best pass protection Burrow's had in his career. If that is truly the case when we get to the season here and these guys play at the level we expect at the offensive line, there's an opportunity here for JaMarr Chase to be the number 1 wide receiver. Because if he gets volume, if he gets this kind of volume in the red zone and he hits some deep plays, kind of like we talked about with Devante Adams, and turn a bunch of those deep targets into touchdowns, then we're talking about a guy that finishes wide receiver 1 overall. And there's a recipe here for Chase, even with that target competition of T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and who's at the tight end spot from now? Irv Smith Jr. So love JaMarr Chase. My wide receiver 2, though, on the season is going to be Cooper Kupp. He was the wide receiver 1 in fantasy points per game last year, 18.2 fantasy points per game compared to Justin Jefferson's 17.9. So if he played the full season, he was on pace to be the number 1 wide receiver despite Justin Jefferson's insane season last year. He was on pace for 142 receptions, which would have been first. He's on pace for just over 11 touchdowns, which would have been second. And he was on pace for over 1,500 yards, which would have been second. So we're talking about touchdowns, reception volume, a great over 1,500 yards would be fantastic. We get Matthew Stafford back too. The offensive line almost certainly bottomed out last year. It was terrible. I think it was the 3rd worst from PFF's pass blocking efficiency metric. So they were very, very poor. There's not a lot of target competition here when we're talking about Ben Skronik, Van Jefferson, Tyler Higbee. If Cooper Kupp is healthy, even if Matthew Stafford's available all season, great. Even if he misses some time, Kupp still demands ridiculous volume. This offense is built around him. I don't expect that to change. So I love Cooper Kupp as my wide receiver too. And the number 1 wide receiver in my rankings heading into the 2023 season, Justin Jefferson, the wide receiver 1 in 2022. It's really hard to put anyone else in this spot. He led the league in both yards and receptions. This team was passing the ball and throwing the ball at a really high rate, 64.4%, 3rd in the NFL. So that can tell you why that volume was there. Now they let Dalvin Cook go. I know a lot of people are, eager to see what Alexander Mattison can do in this offense. Do I think Alexander Madison's better than Dalvin Cook? I'm not so sure. Does the team think that? I'm not so sure. I know Dalvin Cook being let go might indicate they don't love his talent, but there's also that salary perspective of it and the money he was making and what they can do with that money. Losing Adam Thielen is also really interesting. He's always been that a really capable red zone threat for this team. He was 7th in the NFL in red zone targets with 36 last year. So if you take those receptions away, they got to go somewhere. There's an opportunity for Jefferson to add those. Of course, bringing in Jordan Addison and drafting him out of USC, I think he can be more successful than Thielen between the 20s, but I'm not so sure as a red zone and end zone threat. Obviously, TJ Hawkinson getting the full season. We still saw Jefferson be productive. This guy is playing at an incredibly high level. If he continues to be getting this volume, which I would anticipate he does, he's got to be your number one guy heading into the season. All right, those are my top 12 wide receivers heading into the 2023 fantasy season. We'll be getting my running backs out to you as well later this week, so be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video as well if you enjoyed, and as well, be sure to check out Peace Collective if you want any vintage sports apparel from some of your favorite teams. Code OwnersBox10 gets you 10% off. Again, that link will be down below in the description. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.